B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, January 31st, 2019. The war drums are beating louder over Venezuela. And today I want to focus in on the corporate media, manufacturing consent and selling us another illegitimate war. And to see the Democrats, for the most part, falling in line behind Trump and Bolton and now Elliott Abrams, it really is hard to describe. It is just plain disgusting. And the media is complicit here. Before I start criticizing the corporate media, I do want to single out Chris Hayes at MSNBC as the only voice I've heard, number one, devoting some time to covering the situation in Venezuela, and number two, strongly opposing at least military action and that sort of intervention into Venezuela, a sovereign state. Now, many of the people who have articulated opposition to some of Trump's all options on the table nevertheless agree with the fundamental idea that Maduro's got to go. And it is stunning to me that we have learned nothing from the regime change wars of the last 18 years. And so, as you may know, I scan a lot of news online, on the tube every night, and I spend time with the public television news hour. It's got a lot of flaws. It excludes many important voices and views from its coverage. But it does provide long-form coverage, and it is my view of what's going on inside the Beltway on any given day. And last night, true to form, they presented what appeared to be a point-counterpoint, two different perspectives on Venezuela. And they trotted out Ben Gadan, who worked for Obama on the National Security Council. And as we have been detailing, we'll cover some of it again today, the Obama administration continued the policies in place to destabilize the socialist government of Venezuela and try to take it down. So Ben Gadan has no beef with the coup. Oh no, he believes Maduro must go and that we are in a position to determine that. Now, the other perspective was considerably more hawkish. Isaias Medina, identified as the former UN envoy of the Maduro government of Venezuela, well, he's all in for a coup. He is extremely pro-coup to the extent that I jotted down he reminds me of Ahmed Chalabi, the guy who ran the so-called Iraqi National Congress. He was funded by the CIA, then funded by the Pentagon, and he was a puppet. And Medina wants to be part of the new puppet show in Venezuela, led by Juan Guaido. And so I can add to the list of one more Democratic member of Congress who has come out opposed to military action, Joaquin Castro, who is a congressman from San Antonio, Texas, appeared with Chris Hayes a couple of nights ago and was very strongly opposed to trying to intervene. But he did call for new elections, and he nevertheless acknowledged that the sanctions hurt the average people. And, of course, it's American sanctions that have created the dire circumstances that then are used to say, oh, gosh, we must act. This isn't too different from Samantha Power, saying we had to invade Libya. It was part of that coalition because lives were at risk in Benghazi. Not the same as the U.S. embassy or consulate incident there. And so the humanitarian hawks have joined the brutal neocons. And we're hearing a few people kind of choke or pre-vomit when they hear that Eliot Engel has been made the point man on Venezuela by the Trump administration. But by and large, everybody is down for this one. And it is so disgusting. In today's New York Times, they gave a lot of space to the guy who is the wannabe puppet of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. And he offers a little history, and then he starts lying. Maduro's re-election on May 20th last year was illegitimate, as has since been acknowledged by a large part of the international community. If you believe that, I invite you to listen to the in-depth interview I'm releasing today with human rights activist, international attorney Dan Kovalik, who was one of the international observers of last May's presidential election in Venezuela. And he goes into some detail explaining that it was legitimate. Now, the opposition boycotted the election, which they now call illegitimate. And they're allowed to have it both ways because it supports the notion that Maduro, a socialist, has to go. So, continuing to quote from Guaido's op-ed here, his original 6-year term was set to end on January 10th. By continuing to stay in office, Nicolas Maduro is usurping the presidency. Now, come on. That is simply an assertion. And it's a convenient one that is now embraced by Trump and many Democrats and, selectively, leaders around the world, notably China, Russia, and Syria and Turkey, have been the leading opponents of the legitimization of Juan Guaido. So then he says, my ascension as interim president is based on Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution, which says at the outset of a new term there is no elected head of a state. Power is vested in the President of the National Assembly. Well, there is an elected head of state. And he is allowed to use that as a premise to claim that he didn't self-proclaim, but that he assumed the function of president in adherence to the Constitution. And you're going to hear the language of democracy used to rationalize and legitimize undemocratic moves by the United States and perhaps others. Now, Guaido mentions that he's still got buckshot in his butt from being shot by members of the armed forces at what he called a peaceful protest in 2017. But we know the opposition has not always been peaceful. And some of the violence on the streets of Caracas and elsewhere in Venezuela today is being blamed on Maduro's people, but is likely caused by the opposition. So what we're seeing here is a massive fictional approach to governance and to recognition by one state of another. There's another lie here that I can't help calling out. Guaido says that 84% of the people reject Maduro's rule. Well, 86% of the people reject international intervention. And you can, cite polls that favor your position all day long. But it doesn't change my position, which is we have no basis whatsoever to intervene in Venezuela. We are doing so, and it is a brazen act of aggression on our part. Over at the Washington Post today, they're focusing on a crackdown on journalists. And by the way, I do not say that Nicolas Maduro is a saint and that he is doing nothing wrong. He's under siege, and he's trying to figure out the best way to hold on to power when very powerful forces are arrayed against him. And so the fact that some journalists have been expelled from the country, others have been arrested, is in some ways par for the course. But that is the piece that the Washington Post is trying to add to Americans' knowledge today, again, to manufacture consent for this outrageous proposed coup. Then at the New York Times, they focus on a murky group of police officers in a unit that was formed by Maduro just a year ago. And they have a special name, but it's way in this article, like on page 6. The group is called Special Actions Force, or FAES. And the New York Times and its biased reporter, Ana Vanessa Herrero, who I've seen spinning the story on television in recent days, she says that this group, special, forces or, cops, is being used as enforcers to stifle dissent and to punish those who become part of the opposition. And once again, this may be true. But consider that nobody in the world is planning to take out Rodrigo Duterte, the strongman leader of the Philippines, who has unleashed his death squads and vigilantes across his entire nation. Hundreds of people have died since he took power. But we get no such context from this dramatic coverage of Venezuela. So as the antidote to this yellow journalism, I encourage you to follow the link in today's show file and read the very well-written and I consider it to be honest and neutral kind of a guide written by Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers. You can find them at Popular Resistance. I've interviewed both of them over the years, and they are solid, credible people. And they go through quite a few things that the American public's being misled about. They open with this. Two things stand out about the U.S. coup in Venezuela. First, it's unusually open. Typically, America tries to hide its coups. Second, the coup is built on a series of obvious falsehoods, yet the bipartisans in Washington, with few exceptions, keep repeating them. And so they go through the 5 biggest lies. Correcting the record, they say Nicolas Maduro is the legitimate president, and they detail the facts about the election last year and the margin by which he won. There were 2 opponents in the race, actually 3. So it was a 4-way race. But you would never know that from reading the New York Times. Number 2, the economic crisis is caused by outside intervention, internal sabotage, and the decline in oil prices. And in my conversation today with Dan Kovalik, you'll hear his assertion, and I support it, that there was a scheme that was advanced by the U.S. and the Saudis to keep oil flowing, to keep the price low, in order to harm Russia and Venezuela. And it worked. Oil prices are just starting to rebound, and that could give a new lease on life to Venezuela if the U.S. were not interfering and imposing new sanctions. Number 3, truth. The opposition is violent, not the Maduro government. I personally believe there is some violence on both sides, but I want you to hear their argument there. Number 4, the National Assembly acted in violation of the law and is in contempt of court, and they offer context that goes beyond just the recent assertion by Guaido that he is the legitimate president. So it's a worthwhile read, and as I said, I've linked to it. As I mentioned, I caught up today with Dan Kovalik, the international human rights lawyer. He also is a staff attorney for the steelworkers in Pittsburgh, and he was an election observer in Venezuela last year. Here's an excerpt from my in-depth interview with Dan Kovalik.
Yes, and this is always the game plan. Noam Chomsky talked about it, is destroying the danger of a good example. The U.S. will not allow a country like Venezuela to find an independent economic and political path, to go its own way, to try to develop in the way it wants to. And when it does try to do that, the U.S. will set an example of that country, that what will happen is the U.S. will destroy their economy, and it sends a message to everyone that you dare not try to go your independent course. And what we have to keep in mind is that the Venezuelan revolution under Chavez was in many ways and has been in many ways successful. Up till 2014, again, when the oil prices were artificially depressed, when sanctions began, Venezuela was lauded for its policies, which greatly lowered the poverty rate there, lowered the extreme poverty rate there, increased equality there, brought up socially and economically hitherto oppressed peoples, Afro-Venezuelans, indigenous peoples. And even through this crisis, incredibly, up till now, Venezuela has continued to build houses for the poor. They've built a total of 2.5 million homes, subsidized homes for the poor. So the U.S. has done everything it has to stop this progress, and it looks like it may succeed in doing that. But I think that is not something to revel in. I think it's something to be frankly, quite ashamed.
Another good article about this is from the fine folks at Gray Zone Project. And Ben Norton writes today about a new document that was surfaced by WikiLeaks that defines the unconventional warfare methods used by the United States, and they include economic weapons. So let me read a quote from this to you. WikiLeaks released this just a couple of days ago, and it is a document entitled Financial Instrument of U.S. National Power and Unconventional Warfare. Here's a quote from one paragraph. Like the economic activity which all nation-states and individuals respond to, the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces can use financial power as a weapon in times of conflict, up to and including large-scale general war. Like the economic activity that it's related to, most financial power is unmanaged, routine, and peaceful. However, manipulation of U.S. financial strength can leverage the policies and cooperation of state governments. And this is something that Kovalik commented on as well, that this is part of a long-running plan that goes back to the almost successful coup against Hugo Chavez in 2002. So the picture is pretty clear, and our media is intentionally, in my view, manipulating information, selectively deleting contrary information, conflicting viewpoints, and there is a rush to conflict with Venezuela that could see us mired into another regime change operation for years to come. And as John Bolton blurted out on the Fox News Business News channel yesterday, yeah, it's about the oil. We want that oil. And I'm sorry to report that one voice who might be piping up right now to oppose this military adventurism has entered hospice. And I would describe him as my favorite Republican member of Congress, because I don't have any others. Walter Jones, Jr., age 75, has served for many years from North Carolina, and he has managed to get reelected despite opposing Bush's wars, despite being an opponent of Obama's wars. And he's a guy who really has a strong moral and ethical core. And presuming that hospice means the end is near, he will be missed. Catch-22 is what I thought of when I heard about the ruling by Judge Leonie Brinkema in a case brought by reporters who want her to approve the release of the indictment of Julian Assange that was accidentally revealed when, in an unrelated case, they cut and pasted language from a series of documents or the indictment of Julian Assange. But Judge Brinkema said that while, this is no longer secret, she's going to consider it to be secret or at least unproven, because the government refuses to confirm or deny that Assange has been charged. And so Brinkema ducked under the cover. Until there is a sufficiently certain disclosure that charges have in fact been filed, the committee's common law and First Amendment claims are premature. To hold otherwise would mean that any member of the public or press could effectively force the government to admit or deny that charges had been filed. Now, that belies the significance of this case, and that the average person accused of a crime, an American citizen in the United States, wouldn't have the same concerns of a foreign national who is holed up in the Embassy of Ecuador in London for now 6+ years. So that's another spineless member of our judiciary. And while we're talking about WikiLeaks, the Mueller probe is in an interesting tangle with one of the Russian companies that it indicted in the summer of 2018. And I love reading the coverage of this. Rachel Maddow was whining last night. Why do we let this Russian company defend itself in an American court from charges filed by the special counsel? Shouldn't they just meekly submit? Recognize that We're the good guys here. I mean, it's just amazing. She said that the Russians and their American lawyers are weaponizing democracy. And what did they do? Well, they used their rights, the rights of the accused under the American system, and they obtained discovery, right? The evidence that the government has against them. And then somehow, more than 1,000 files that the Mueller office had shared confidentially with the attorneys for this group called Concord Management got hacked. And they're available online, courtesy of a guy named Hacking Redstone, or a party, I don't know who it is. This first surfaced last October, and Mueller made a court filing saying that Concord shouldn't be given access to any more material because it'll wind up hacked and on the internet. Now, we don't know if Russian hackers are responsible for this, but wouldn't that be rich? And again, I just find it amazing that people think that Mueller is some sort of a saint, that every move he makes is beyond reproach, beyond question, can't be challenged. And he's been repeatedly shocked that the Russians are engaging in a process to object to his indictment. He knows he'll never win a conviction in any of those cases. It's just for show. But a lot of Americans take it in hook, line, and sinker. Federal immigration officials have admitted that they are force-feeding at least 6 immigrants, just like we did to prisoners at Guantanamo on hunger strikes. Now, one of them says 6, and another says that there are 11 of them, 11 detainees at an El Paso processing center who are on a hunger strike. So I guess about half of them have been forced into forced feeding. The men stopped eating to protest verbal abuse, threats of deportation. They're also upset about lengthy lockups while they await legal proceedings. Just another disgusting development in the crackdown on migration and those individuals. There was also an op-ed on January 29th published in the New York Times by journalist and author Victoria Law. And she noted that 2/3 of these people being held in immigrant prisons are confined by private companies. Yes, for-profit prison operators. And one feature of privately run prisons is called the Voluntary Work Program. There are now 6 separate lawsuits saying that the privately run detention centers are coercing detainees into the Voluntary Work Program for $1 a day, and if you don't volunteer, they cut off your phone calls, your access to basic elements, in the canteen. Because this is done under civil law and not criminal, there is a series of civil cases that are challenging those procedures or those practices. I want to credit Fred, who is one of our listeners in Detroit. He sent me an article from the Free Press. 8 people have been arrested and indicted in an immigration fraud case for conspiracy to commit visa fraud and harboring aliens for profit. And this is the result of an elaborate and probably pretty expensive sting operation where the Department of Homeland Security and its special, what is this group called? They have a special investigations unit. Well, they took over a campus and set up a fake university in Farmington Hills, Michigan, the University of Farmington. I think I actually saw their logo on a sweatshirt in Japan. Anyway, the allegation is that from February of 17th through this month, the defendants conspired with each other and others to fraudulently facilitate hundreds of foreign nationals in illegally remaining and working in the United States by actively recruiting them to enroll in this private university that, unbeknownst to the conspirators, was operated by Homeland Security investigation special agents as part of an undercover operation. How low will we go? I don't think we have found bottom yet. Also want to thank listener and whistleblower Linda Lewis, for an email here with an article from Newsweek The Department of Energy has disclosed that it shipped about half a ton of weapons-grade radioactive plutonium from South Carolina to Nevada months ago. And this was followed by legal action by Nevada that didn't think the shipment had occurred, challenging the right of the federal government to dump nuclear waste in the Silver State. In a federal court filing yesterday, the Trump administration disclosed the National Nuclear Security Administration transferred the nuclear material before the court case was filed. And so they've been lying to the plaintiffs, who are Nevada officials, over the last 3 months. Following the disclosure, are they pissed in Nevada? Governor Steve Sisolak: I am beyond outraged by this completely unacceptable deception from the U.S. Department of Energy. The department led the state of Nevada to believe that they were engaging in good faith negotiations with us regarding a potential shipment of weapons-grade plutonium, only to reveal that those negotiations were a sham all along. They lied to the state of Nevada, misled a federal court, and jeopardized the safety of Nevada's families and environment. Yeah, that's what makes America great these days. And a note from listener Paul L. Sesser. He enjoyed recent podcasts, the interview with psychologist and author Bryant Welch and his gaslighting metaphor. He liked the Max Blumenthal interview about the Integrity Initiative out of Britain. And he said, I just finished listening for the second time to your most recent interview with Aaron Mate. You talk about what I believe are the three main reasons for the whole Russiagate dog and pony show, although I don't believe you discussed the second and third enough. All right, his first point, a cover-up of how poorly the Dems ran Hillary's campaign. Number two, with the whole threat of terrorism losing momentum, the demonizing of Russia to start a new Cold War to maintain or increase military spending. That's a good point, Paul. And this one you've discussed in numerous other podcasts, the attack on the electronic media. Russiagate and Trump have led to the whole fake news narrative. Control of that without pesky truth seekers on the internet is the goal. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate your comments. And I want to invite anyone else to send me your comments. I love getting feedback. And this is the point where I always mention that you can subscribe to the Peter B. Collins podcast. Just visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber, and it's easy to make a choice of the level of support that fits your budget and your intention. And I deeply appreciate those who subscribe. And in our remaining time here, a few quickies. The Veterans Administration, in the move to privatize care, has made a subtle change in the rules. It used to be that veterans could use a private health care provider if the nearest VA clinic was 40 miles or more distant from their home. Well, the language has been changed from 40 miles to a 30-minute drive. Now, I happen to have a friend who works at the VA in Los Angeles. And you could live 2 miles from that place, and it could take you more than 30 minutes to get there. So this is a loophole that you could drive not just a Mack truck through, but a whole squadron of tanks. And this is just the next step in the privatization of the Veterans Administration, one of the pet projects of your friendly Koch brothers. Yesterday, I led the podcast with the announcement of the bankruptcy filing by what I call California's rogue utility, Pacific Gas and Electric. And in the afternoon, there was a very heated courtroom session before Federal District Judge William Alsup. Now, he found PG&E to be criminally negligent in the San Bruno gas pipeline explosion about 10 years ago. And he revisited that yesterday, saying that he doesn't believe the claims of PG&E. Why is it PG&E says safety is our number one thing? I heard it all the time, safety, safety, safety. But it's not really true. And he said that the wildfires in 2017 and 2018 led him to this point. Will we be seeing headlines? PG&E has done it again, started another fire and some other town burned down because you didn't turn the power off or you didn't cut the trees? The CEO, the new acting CEO of the utility, was groveling. He said, I've been listening carefully, Your Honor. But will things change? We shall see. 2019 could be the year that white-collar drug lords face justice in the United States. There are a series of trials of the executives of drug companies. The first up is in Massachusetts, where what's this guy's name? John Kapoor is on trial for his promotion of the narcotic nasal spray Subsys, which contains fentanyl. And the U.S. attorney told jurors that Kapoor and the company ran a nationwide kickback and conspiracy scheme that effectively bribed doctors to prescribe patients an addictive fentanyl spray, much more powerful than morphine, that had been approved only to alleviate the pain of advanced cancer. And they cite one instance where a sales executive and former stripper named Sunrise Lee gave a lap dance to an Illinois doctor to persuade him to prescribe the drug to patients that it wasn't suitable for. And maybe she sprayed a little up his nose just to make him feel even better. I want to warn the people of Puerto Rico, the Clintons, all three of them, are there, and they came to help. Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea are there on behalf of the Clinton Foundation. And they are aiming to fund dozens of projects to help Puerto Rico and nearby islands recover from Hurricanes Irma and Maria. But after what they did to Haiti following the brutal earthquake there, don't trust them. The Clintons, she was Secretary of State, he was the UN Special Ambassador and the head of the Clinton Foundation and a former president. And all they did was crony capitalism. They built a luxury hotel. But they didn't replace any of the homes that were utterly destroyed by the earthquake. Well, thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. We do it every day when I'm around, and I encourage you to share it all over the damn place. You'll find it on YouTube, and I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling